We are disassembling the Heretic Manticore X. This is a relatively large OTF knife. I love it. There's some cool design features I'm going to show you in the disassembly. Let's get right into it. We're going to take out the longer pocket clip bolts first. So these are much longer than the other bolts that hold together this knife because they are structural. They go through the pocket clip, through the carbon fiber, and into the aluminum on the other side of this knife. So there's your pocket clip. Pocket clip is titanium. The bolts on this knife are actually all titanium as well, which means not only is the MagnaCut blade on this not going to rust, but the bolts are not going to rust either. So this is a great OTF knife for having in your pocket when you're working, anywhere you might have moist conditions. If you want to carry an OTF, this is a great option because there's very little on this knife that can rust. Now you'll notice I'm not taking this apart in a plastic bag like you would with most OTFs because I'm not worried about too much of it falling apart. And I'll show you why that is. So if you look at, there's your carbon fiber, right? I took out the screws with it. If you look at what's going on here with the locks on this knife, here's the spring plate. I've already oiled it and everything. Spring plate goes back together like this. The end with the shelf on it is right up here. That goes toward the tip of the blade. There's your spring plate. If you look at what's going on with the locks on this knife, what they've done is they've captured that whole lock inside of the aluminum handle for this knife. So there's no, that lock is not going to fall out on you and spring across the room and get lost forever because it's captured. You do have to be slightly careful of the spring that is in this trigger. This goes into here. That can spring out on you. Just be a little careful of that. Trigger is made of steel, not titanium like on some knives. Here's the stop pin. That just pulls out like that. And then the blade just pulls out just like so. And there's your knife disassembled. Super cool, super easy. You do have to be a little bit careful of this. So this is the trigger plate. The trigger on this knife is actually running on bearings. How cool is that? I mean, there's a reason why this action is so smooth with a relatively large blade, and that is one of the big reasons. So you can get in there, you can finagle that lock, you can pull that spring out. I'm not going to do it because those don't typically get very dirty on an OTF knife. They're not dirty on this one, and I don't really need to take them out and service them. So super cool features that allow for easy and safe disassembly at home, cleaning, etc. of this OTF knife. You can see the glass breaker bearing right there. I'm not going to take that out either because it's hard to get back in. So super cool, very straightforward disassembly. I'm going to go ahead and stick it back together here. Again, hold that lock upwards like this so that the blade slides past it. Once you're in between these two locks, drop your stop pin back in, right? Spring plate goes back on like this. See how it pushes that lock over? That's important for getting it back together. Oh, I lost a bearing. So that is what you don't want to do, is get your bearings caught on something. So those have to be just knocked back into the holes like that. It's actually a little easier if there's a little oil on the knife like there is right now because they don't want to roll away from you quite so easily. So there is my bearings knocked back in there. I'm going to hold the trigger more vertically this time so it doesn't knock out. There is my trigger back on with the spring plate pushing back up into the hole there. I'm going to hold that on while I put the cover plate back on. And what I'm actually going to do while this cover plate back on is slide that trigger up and down a couple times and make sure the blade runs up and locks like it should, so that I know when I put that back in there that everything's going to run freely like it should. So bolt here. Bolt here. And I'm going to test it with just those 2 bolts in there to make sure everything went back the way it's supposed to. There we go, all together like it should be. The rest of the bolts go in, and that is a very straightforward, very easy OTF knife disassembly and reassembly. No reason to be afraid of this knife. Again, just another reason to own this knife rather than a knife from another company. This is my new favorite OTF knife. My previous favorite was the Benchmade Shootout. It's still my second favorite. But this is just, it's so practical, it's so easy to care for, it's so easy to own, it's very easy to use, very easy to clean and maintain. Just love this knife from a practical standpoint, as well as an aesthetic standpoint. So, cool knife. There's your disassembly, reassembly. Hope that is very helpful, and have a knife day.